back to J&H Tech Tips. Today we're going to go through the bobbin cases, preventive maintenance, some tension regulation, how to set your bobbin case thread tension without having to have a grams gauge. Most of your manufacturers are going to have gram gauge settings for the bobbin thread tension. What that basically means is when you pull on the thread with a grams gauge, it's going to register a particular setting on here, and different machines will have different settings. Same way here, the pull tension is going to have different settings, and all of these bobbin cases are different. We're going to use this one for doing our demonstration, but there are other bobbin cases. You can see you've got two different bobbin cases here. This is where you're going to pull your thread into in order to achieve the thread tension. So it'll look like this. And as it pulls, it has a spring underneath here that's going to trap the thread against this metal band here. And then it's going to provide a certain amount of tension to this. Bobbin thread tensions are very light compared to the upper thread tensions because they're just paying out the amount of thread that you have your stitch length set to. You don't have to have a whole lot of bobbin thread tension, even when you're doing embroidery. So you have tension regulating screws and tension retaining screws. The tension retaining screws retains the tension spring onto this part here. This is your tension retaining screws on a drop-in bobbin. These are the regulating screws. So if you tighten this, it increases the tension on your bobbin case. If you loosen it, it loosens it. You'll notice that this one has a substance on there that's going to keep this screw from loosening off. These are set from the factory this way, and so theoretically you should never have to adjust your tension. Occasionally you'll have to clean the tension out because the debris holds the spring open and you won't wind up getting any tension on your bobbin thread. You have to clean that out. I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. So this one you don't want to adjust. It's usually not going to be a problem. If you're going to do a lot of sewing with different sizes and types of threads, it's a good idea to get a second bobbin case that you don't have this green stuff on here, paint or something. It just holds this screw so it won't come undone. What you want to be able to do is adjust this tension screw so that you can regulate the tension, because sometimes larger threads, if you're doing reverse bobbin work, this will need to be loosened off quite a bit because the pearl cotton that most everybody uses is really thick. Or if you want to do smocking, you would have to loosen this off quite a ways in order to get the proper tension of the bobbin thread coming out. So you want to just get a second bobbin case so that you can have that capability to adjust your bobbin thread. This particular bobbin case, you'll see, only has one screw, and this is the tension regulating screw. Instead of a screw on the back, this just fits down into a little slot underneath here. And as you tighten this screw, it puts down pressure on this flat spring against the bobbin case, which is where it's going to trap the thread. The tighter you make this screw, the more tension is going to be applied to this spring and the more tension applied to the thread. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to take a sample stitch to see if there's anything we need to do. I'm going to pick my thread up. Now we're just going to do a straight stitch to start off with. And we want to be on our center needle position on A. And it's a good idea to always put your finger on the top thread to hold it for at least a couple of stitches. So I can already tell there's a problem. Oh, look, you can see our top thread looks really bad. It's not really our top thread though, it's our bobbin thread. If you're getting loops on the top side of your fabric, in most cases, that is our bobbin thread. If we're getting the same type of loops on the bottom side of the fabric, in most cases, that's our top thread. So we're going to check to make sure that our top thread is set correctly, and most of these tensions will have a range. And you see this has lines in between 3 and 5, and there's no lines in the other areas. In the middle of that is for most upper thread tensions, the average tension or the common tension you want to have it set to is 4. Some of them are 5. You just have to look between the line demarcations and pick somewhere in the middle. This gives you a variance so that you can regulate your tension. We're going to make sure that we don't have another problem that's hurting our machine. We want to make sure that our thread comes from there around through our thread guide and is down in our tension discs and not on the outside of the disc either side. And then it's going down, coming up through the take-up lever. The take-up lever is this eye on the front that's going to go up and down inside, and that takes up the excess loop of thread that goes around the bobbin case. Problem with that kind of stitch is you see it can just be pulled out, and that's not what you want to happen to your evening dress on the way to the dinner party. Threading your machine, you want to hold on to the thread where it comes off of the spool to add some tension, and we're going to thread everything while we hold on to our tension all the way down to the needle. And then we will thread our needle. Okay. So in the lifted position, when you pull on your thread, you should have a very light tension. Should not flex the needle at all. When the presser foot is lowered, you see how much it's flexing that needle. It's supposed to be super tight. And in relationship to our bobbin thread tension has a very light tension. So we know that our upper thread tension is working like it's supposed to. We're going to go ahead and raise that back up. So now what we want to do is we want to pull on our bobbin thread tension. This has no tension. I mean, literally no tension. So what that usually means, one of two things, since it's in between, in the tension spring, underneath the tension spring where it's supposed to be, that means that there might be some debris underneath the edge of this that is causing the thread tension to not happen because it's holding this spring off, open from this spring and not giving us any tension on our thread. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a really lightweight pin and we're going to go in. This is the threading slot. We're going to go in behind the threading slot and you see it coming out, and we're going to swipe this all the way out a couple of times to make sure that we have gotten any debris. Now we're going to test this again. When you test the tension on your bobbin thread, you want to make sure not to put your finger on here, because if you press this spring with your finger, you can get a erroneous tension pull reading. We're going to hold somewhere over behind here, and I still have no thread tension. What that usually means is that this regulating screw has not adjusted this bobbin case correctly. So you'll get that a lot if you get a lot of different people using a machine. People will automatically go to the bobbin thread tension. No matter what problem you're seeing on your fabric, it's always the most commonly perceived problem is your bobbin thread tension. The bobbin thread tension should always be your last resort to check it. You want to check this and do the pull test with the thread, with the press foot in the up position and the press foot in the down position, to make sure that that setting is okay before you do anything else. So I'm going to show you how to set this. If you notice, this has a full bobbin. And a full bobbin is a must because that does add weight. You notice I have a plastic bobbin in here. The plastic bobbins will give you a better tension setting throughout the fullness of the bobbin case, all the way down to empty. The metal bobbins, it's going to increase your bobbin thread tension because you're pulling the weight of the bobbin around in the bobbin case. So it adds more tension actually to the thread. It's a very slight difference, but it is noticeable. You can see it. Same way we were doing checking with this, we're going to check with this. Now this has a little bit of tension here, so this is more than likely set correctly. But if we were going to clean this out, you're going to leave the thread in there because you want to know where the thread comes out. And if you notice, you see right here, this is where the thread goes in. and that is our tension regulating screw. So right behind the tension regulating screw, you stick this pin down in between here, and you just pull out. All you're trying to do is put the pin right down in where it comes, where the tension regulating screw is here. You're going to put the pin down in there and just swipe it out. And then you're going to check your tension again. And yep, now we have the correct tension on our bobbin case. Should be very light. So that's the same way on pretty much all of the drop-in bobbins. So on this kind of bobbin, any kind of bobbin that is a metal bobbin that you put the bobbin into the bobbin case and then you install the bobbin case into the machine, a simple way to adjust your tension setting is if I have a full bobbin in there and pull on this, that should be just lifting the bobbin off of the table, and it's not. So this screw needs to be adjusted. So if we turn this to the right, and so we're going to go in a half tension at first, or you can go a quarter. So if we go a quarter tension at first, we pull on our thread. Yep, I feel a little bit of tension, and it stands. Oh, look, it stands it up, but it will not lift it off of the table. So we're going to go another quarter of a turn. And now then, I lift it off, and if I give this a shake, the bobbin does go down a little bit. That's what the bobbin thread tension setting should be like. Sometimes when you try to do this, your bobbin will fall out. Slide it back in and give it a little bit more tension. Some people will actually put it in their hand and hold it like this and see if it comes down. It keeps the bobbin case tilted so that the bobbin is skyward, and the gravity will keep it down inside the bobbin case. So you just want to make sure that some thread is coming out of there when you're giving it a shake. If it doesn't come out, then it's too tight. Your bobbin thread tension setting is too tight, and you will need to loosen the screw off. If you go quarter of a turns at a time, usually that'll get you where you're at. You can go eighth of an inch or eighth of a turn, and that'll be more finite. But we're just going to see what the difference is. So we're going to put our bobbin back in our machine. And by the way, the same idea with this is going to work with this. The problem is going to be you can't really pull on this. You can't do the same thing, the drop test with the thread. You just have to make sure that you have some tension on the thread. So if you take this bobbin case and you hold it in your hand kind of like this, and you give it a little bit of pull of thread, and see it stays kind of on my fingers. If it comes right, if you can't hold it at all and it comes off of your hand, this is too tight. This one you won't adjust. This one you will. You can adjust this tighter or looser. This one should be already set, so if you pull on that, you should be able to tell what is the regular thread tension for your machine, because these are set from the factory. So we're going to put that in. We're going to pick up our thread, and if you notice, you'll see that's the needle thread. It's going around the bobbin case. So another little tip right here. When you start and stop your machine, if you notice our needle is up, a lot of people will think that my needle is up, so I'm okay to lift my presser foot and pull my fabric out. Well, not really, because that's the needle thread. So you have a needle thread going down and halfway around the hook and then back up, and you also are going to have the bobbin thread. So you would have actually 3 threads in there, and that's not going to work. So if we want to make sure that this stitch has completed so that we can pull our fabric out, you want to make sure that the take-up lever is at its topmost position. So if you watch that, you'll see the take-up lever coming up, and that's taking up that excess loop of thread. And see, it pulled up our bobbin thread. But now then, see, we could pull our fabric out nice and easy because our take-up lever is at our top. So a good idea is whenever you want to, you're starting and stopping position. When you want to start sewing or when you want to stop sewing, make sure the needle is up and the take-up lever is up. Pretty simple. So now we're going to Do another seam here. And remember, put your finger on your top stitch, your top thread, for at least a couple of stitches. And remember, needle up, take up, lever up. See how nice and easy it pulls out. So now we have a pretty good stitch there. By the looks of this stitch, you will see these look pretty individualized. You can see the top thread right there. That's the top thread. And if you look on this side, you can see the bobbin thread. That's where it's coming up through. And these stitches don't look as individualized. In most cases, your top thread, you want them to look more individualized. So I would prefer to see that on the top than that, which most everybody else would. So what we're going to do, I'll explain to you how these threads are crossing over each other. The bobbin thread and the top thread are going to cross over each other and form a knot. If you want to increase the upper thread tension, you would turn this to a higher number. Since we're in the middle, we want to try to balance it to that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our bobbin case out. Remember, bobbin thread and top thread is basically a tug of war. One of them is going to win. Since this one is its normal setting, we want to pull this knot down into the fabric. We want to pull the bobbin thread to pull the knot down just a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove our bobbin and bobbin case, and we're going to increase this 1/8 of a turn, and we're going to just sew right alongside of our previous stitch. Remember to put your finger on the thread for at least 2 stitches. Stop up, stop up. So that didn't really help us as much as I thought it would. So we're going to go another 1/8 of an inch. And so if we look at our seam now that stitch I really like. Because this is a thinner fabric, you're not going to hide the knot totally from the top side. It's impossible because this fabric has been woven with is much, much thinner than the actual thread itself that we're sewing with. So you can't really hide 2 thicknesses of thread where that knot is. You can't really hide that between 2 layers of fabric because it's the same thickness. You'll see one knot on one side and one knot on the other. So if you're using black on the bottom and white on the top, it's impossible for you to hide that unless you have a really thick fabric. But this looks like a really good seam. It's nice and strong. The knot that meets in the middle of the fabric is the strongest stitch. If it meets on one side or the other, it's easier for the thread to come undone and pull out further because the knot in the middle is the best. It's the strongest seam. So there we have it. We've got a nice seam and we've regulated our bobbin thread tension without having to use a grams gauge and get the manufacturer's setting. It's not really difficult. It's just you have to know the procedure to go through. It's important to make sure that you always know where your common thread tension should be, and it should be in your book. That it should tell you what number is the most common setting for most threads. When you do this test, it's also really important that you use the same thread on the bobbin that you're using on the top. That way your knot will be equal. They give you a setting on the top, a tension setting on the top, because if I'm using a slightly larger thread on the bobbin, it's going to actually create more tension, and I will have to usually turn this up to equalize that tension so that my knot meets in the middle of the fabric. Once you have your bobbin thread tension set, you don't need to go back and check it unless there's something really wrong, you know, like we had in the beginning of this video where we're getting big loops on the top side of the fabric. You know, then, you know, you may have to go through this whole procedure all over again. So nobody sews on 1 layer of fabric. You always want to use 2 layers of fabric. It's going to give you the best looking stitch and you'll get the most accurate bobbin and upper thread tension settings so that the knot's going to meet in the middle of the fabric. Like I say, nobody sews on one layer of fabric. They're usually constructing something, so they're sewing at least 2 layers of fabric together. The thicker the fabric, the easier it is to hide the knot from both the top and the bottom. For example, a batted quilt. A batted quilt will, at first, when you finish it, you'll look and you'll see, if you're using black and white, black on the bottom, white on top, from the top you'll be able to see the black, and from the bottom you'll be able to see the white until you launder it. Once it's laundered, those colors you won't be visible from the other side if you have that knot meeting in the middle of the fabric, because that batting is going to kind of fluff up and close those holes, and so you won't see that. On this kind of fabric, however, you're going to see from the top and the bottom, you're going to see the opposite thread. So you always want to make sure you use a common zigzag foot or a straight stitch foot if you're straight stitching. What that means is that all the way across the back here, it's solid. So that way the feed dogs back here are grabbing the thread and the fabric and pulling that through and holding it flat. Some of the feet will have a carve out underneath and down the middle. That is for decorative sewing or applique. So if I were sewing, say, that stitch right there, I would want to put in my decorative sewing foot or my applique foot. So just to give you an extra tip here, in regards to your needle, you should always match your needle to the project. For example, you're going to sew this, you can sew with a size 12, size 14, and it'll be fine. If you were going to sew jeans, you would want a size 16-100 or a size 18-110. So you match the needle to the project, and then you match the thread to the needle. If I took this thread, I could thread it through just about any needle, from the lightest needle all the way up to the heaviest needle. But if I took a heavyweight thread, size 50 or plus, and I put a size 70 needle in here, 70/10, then it's going to stick in the thread groove that's on the front side of the needle, and it's going to stick in the eye, and it's going to cause you all kinds of grief. So always have to make sure that the thread flows through the needle real easily without any snagging, and the best way to check that is to remove the needle, put the thread through the eye, and pull it through there and make sure that it's going through there easily. The other thing is, if you're breaking needles, you're fraying threads, or you're skipping stitches. Skipping stitches means that you didn't have a stitch here, so you went from a stitch here, all bypass that, there's a hole there, and it doesn't connect, and then it connects here, and then doesn't, yes, it connects, and doesn't. Those are skipped stitches. So if you have any of that, any one of those three, broken needles, skip stitches, frayed threads, go up one size in a needle, and you may actually have to go 2 sizes to see if the problem stops. If the problem stops, it was your needle size. If your problem doesn't stop and you're still having the skip stitches and the frayed threads or even the broken needles, then that's when you need to bring your machine in to have it looked at. So I hope this helps, and if you like these videos and like to see more, please like and subscribe, and please leave me a comment in the comment section if you got something out of this. Describe to me, what you think. If you'd like to see different videos or another video, you can also leave that in the comments below. I try to answer all of my comments, at least read them all. Pretty interested to hear what you have to say. Thanks again for watching.